Yep. Okay, let's just kick this off. Hopefully we'll be heard above the frantic Democrats in the back there. Good luck on your Super Tuesday, whatever. Sujeev is a man of many hats. I think people who are here maybe are familiar with his writings. Sujeev is a consultant. He has his own consultancy company. He's traveling the world. He's got jobs in Africa. He had something in Cambodia. And I was teasing him because in his book, this is the second book Sujeev has read. The first has published. The first was called Unleashing Nepal, and that was published in 2008, I think. Yeah. And this second one is just out, Unleashing the Vajra, which is not a little blue pill that keeps you up at night. This is something that Sujeev will explain to you. Anyway, I met Sujeev in 2016. I'm a freelance journalist, and I was doing a few stories in Kathmandu, and somebody said, "Oh, you should read his book because this tells you a little bit about everything about Nepal." Yeah. And I did, and it was really informative. And Nepal is an exotic country to go to, and I was writing very boring stories about banking and FDI and remittances. And Sujeev's book, the first one, just touches on just about everything you can imagine: history of Nepal, banking, FDI, the donor syndrome in this little country. And his second book is similar, Nepal 101, improved. And I would recommend any journalist who's going to Nepal should read these books because it really is a comprehensive overview of Nepal, its current problems. And Nepal's an incredible country that's gone through so much in the last 20 years. As his book has described, they had their Maoist revolution or insurgency between 1996 and 2006. They had the royal massacre in 2001. You had the end of the monarchy in 2008. Yeah, you had an incredible earthquake that devastated, what was like 600,000 homes or something in 2015. And then you had the Indian embargo right after the earthquake that further devastated poor little Nepal. Yeah. And one of the things that Sujeev's latest book has taken a little bit step further is on this interesting relationship between Nepal and China, which is a new aspect of the Nepalese situation. Sujeev has a nice phrase in the book calling not Nepal landlocked, but Nepal India locked, and it's true that for centuries Nepal has been dominated and under the thumb of India, and now having China in there at least gives a little alternative. Anyway, Sujeev, the man of many hats, as we used to say in the Caribbean, and maybe give an intro and tell us exactly what this Vajra means. Anyway.
Thanks, Peter. Yeah, man of many hats. That's why I have no hair left. So thank you, and thank you, Gwen, for having me here. And maybe I take about 15 minutes or so. Just 15, 20 minutes. I think I would love to, there are a lot of questions that already people have in mind. So I would be more than happy to talk about it. So I'll just give a brief about, when you talk about many hats, to say that, what are the perspective that I'm bringing in with the book. So I'm not an economist, I've been in the corporate world, different worlds. So I talk a bit about that. I'll also talk about why I wrote the book in terms of, as Peter was mentioning, I did a book 10 years ago, Unleashing Nepal. After that, I've got this book, and, why did I write it? And then perhaps share with you some, brief contours of the book and, the format. So, as I was mentioning, a lot of people in Nepal think I'm an economist. I'm not an economist. I'm a trained accountant. That's where I began my world of a career, traversed through many areas. I was in a large corporate house for about 20 years, which had the royal family investments also, so a bit of an insider in terms of to see how the transition and transformation took place within Nepal from different lenses. And then, so working in the business world, the corporate world, the development world, got to know, understand a variety of actors that are in Nepal, and then also, working outside Nepal. So after Kathmandu, my consulting firm, we've been working in Rwanda for now about 8 years. So there's a lot of examples to bring about from Rwanda, Cambodia and Myanmar, as Peter was mentioning, and also in the neighborhood with Bhutan and India. So these are a lot of comparative perspectives I bring in. Also, my personal interest is on, furthering the economic development discourse. So I chair a think tank, the Nepal Economic Forum. And then I have my multiple interests in culture. So as I was mentioning just earlier, as a Shakya, we are supposed descendants of the Buddha. And so that got in a lot of my interest into my own culture, which I was just, there's a lot of ritualistic stuff, which also the Vajra represents. But then I just, over the years, I'm just starting to appreciate that some of my, things that we do have been done from the 7th, 8th century. Some of the, they are living heritages that you get to see. And what does that explain? So that brings in different dimensions of history. So I go back to about, to this, the 8th century Nepal and start the book around that. And then, of course, I travel. I try to connect Nepal to the world, bring the Nepal story, because, when people say, about Nepal, it's very difficult. Like, I was told, we should get a map and talk about, where does Nepal. So when we look at Nepal, it's a strip that is there between India and China, two countries with 1.3, 1.4 billion people. But then Nepal, if it was an EU country, then in the European Union, Nepal would have been the 5th largest populated country or the 6th largest country in EU. So it's not a small country with 28 million people. So we tend to look at Nepal as a small country, so it's not a small country. Currently it's about $34 billion of GDP in terms of per capita PPP, it's about $80 billion. So it's not it's a big country with big problems. So it's not a small country with small problems. And psychologically, we continuously over these decades, as being part of the larger Indian influence, we compared ourselves with Bhutan and Sikkim. A gentleman was mentioning he was there, and Ian was telling me he was in Sikkim. So Sikkim is 500,000 people. Bhutan is 800,000 people. Nepal is 28 million, 30 million people. So, but we tend to compare that. So I said we need to have a new perspective on it. And so a lot of Nepali writings on Nepal in the English language has taken place through Western perspectives, writers who come in, travelers, and who met a set of people, and that formulated what the opinion around Nepal. Also, we had 240 years of the Shah kings that, as Peter was mentioning, that ended in 2008. So if you look at the rapid history from 1776, when Nepal was unified under the Shah kings, and till 2008. So that's a rapid history, and they told the history it's always a hunter that tells the history, and that's the hunter that told the history about what Nepal was all about. But then it doesn't really talk about much about the past of Nepal, which is before 1776. So the community I belong to is the Nyawa community, the aboriginals of the Kathmandu Valley, and we have a calendar that goes back to about 700, 8th century, about 790. And from there are a lot of events that we track to see that Nepal was not a poor country it is referred to, but at some point of time, like India and China, was very prosperous till about the 16th, 17th century. And that's the discourse I try to bring about, to say that if it was, as a connecting, linked, land-linked country, it had its potentials in the 16th, 17th century, as India and China was going to become the, the dominant economies in 2040 with controlling 35% of global GDP, then does Nepal have an opportunity? So I've been dubbed as Nepal's CEO, Chief Eternal Optimist. So when I wrote the last book, people thought it was crazy. How can Nepal have potential? But then I've sort of not only have been is towing the line of optimism, but having a consulting firm based in Nepal and working around the world, I do feel that if you want to do something, it is possible. So also this sort of book I wrote to target young Nepalis. We have 50% of our people are under 25, and 70% of people under 35. And so there's this young diaspora that goes out to study. So for instance, if you look at Australia, Nepalis spend about $1.3 billion a year. And we are number 3 in sending students to Australia after India and China. You look at US, there's 10,000 students that go every year to the US. You go to UK, it's about 40,000. So this is, that's the Nepalis who are studying in Nepal and just going out, living in other countries. So how do you get them to understand Nepal? Sort of the English-speaking, English language reading audience, and that's why I got the book. So in terms of the book, it's divided into 3 parts. We talk about Nepal from, as I was saying, from 879 AD. I mean, stories like how there's a Nepali artist called Arniko who went into Tibet and to China, and if you look at Beijing, is built around how Kathmandu is built. There's a lot of writing around that. There are different stories around that. But then I call it the Bahas of Beijing, in the sense that how, the city of Beijing is built around the city of Kathmandu Valley. Or, this would be in the 11th, 12th century. And also the strong oral history. You bring in Buddhism as a connector, as to how Buddhism through Nepal spread into Tibet and China, and that connected the Indian subcontinent and China. So that's where we see a lot of connectivity. And then, as I was mentioning earlier, there is this fast-paced, history of different kingdoms, and then the Shahs and the Ranas, and then from 1990 we move into a multi-party democracy. We have 10 years of insurgency between 1996 to 2006, and then the insurgents and the political forces got together and said, okay, let's remove the king and establish a federal democratic Nepal. And that's where it just moves at a very rapid speed, and reading history about Nepal is literally like drinking from a fire hose. It's a lot that happens within a 70 years. And that's what the journey I try to look at from my last book, Unleashing Nepal, again published by Penguin, 2009 till now. What has changed? What's changed for the better? What changed for the worse? Because, this is the new Nepal. I mean, this is what we published this. We look at, there are 7 provinces. This is an opportunity mapping of Nepal. So it just gives you, it is a very, very, it's a very densely opportunity-oriented country. That's how I try to portray it, to say that there's a lot of opportunities. This is done for investments and attracting businesses. So this is the new Nepal. 7 provinces we have, and about 38,000 elected officials. This is what just happened 3 years ago, 2017. There's an elections happened. Now we have elected representatives. So from a very autocratic, feudal, a royal family-driven country, we made the transformation into having a country with 7 provinces, 750 odd local units, with close to 40,000 elected officials. So it's a lot has changed, and I try to talk about that journey a bit. In terms of the context, I pick up quite a few pieces, but then I don't pick up the government, because I think in Nepal, and like in many parts of South Asia, we sort of get away by blaming the government, and to say that, is that the challenge, or are there other players that are challenged? And I coined 2 words. So one is called cartelpreneurs, so people who rent-seek on cartels, very cartel behavior, like would be the guilds in the 16th, 17th century Europe. So they gang together, not open up, not have foreign investment come in. You have a lot of nationalist cards you play, and then you keep yourself close. And then you have the other piece, I call it the donorpreneurs. So a lot of Nepal is an aid junkie. Was an aid junkie till a long time back, and I call it AIDS, acute immune dependency syndrome. And so these are type of stories we bring about in terms of to say that and what has the societal impact being of these development partners? Of course, some of the interventions have been successful, but we need to come and examine, like as we were talking about earlier, that if Nepalis are spending $1.3 billion in education in Australia, then Australia putting in $22 million in aid in Nepal. Now, what does that mean? Where should it go? How is that reframing done? Also, what the development community basically brought about is that I call them poverty brokers. So, how do you get the poverty brokers to, think around to become prosperity, sort of partners? So, how do you do that? And those are sort of the things I talk about. In the context, the other key thing is about the migration. So Nepalis have been, migrating for 800,000 years. And if we look at it, migration currently brings in remittances about $8 billion a year. And so you see Nepalis practically everywhere around the world. And that's what has kept it going. So during the world wars, it was the Nepalis who went in and fought wars and brought back money. Before that, you had artisans going to China, Tibet. So its remittances have been, and we find interesting in newer markets, newer areas of operating. So we have a large umbrella organization called the Non-Resident Nepali Association. Now they have chapters in 75 countries. That's the sort of the breadth of migrant Nepalis. You go to Malawi, you find Nepalis. You go to South Sudan, you find Nepalis. It's very interesting. And then it's also the mindset of Nepalis. So there is a diversity visa program of the U.S. government, and every year 1 million Nepalis apply for that, which means out of every 5 able-bodied young people are wanting to migrate. So migration is not only about bringing back money, but it's got a lot of societal stuff in it. So I'll just talk a bit about India and China a bit. So that's, as the title of the book I talk about is Nepal's journey between India and China. And in that, I talk about, how, as I was mentioning earlier, 16th, 17th century and 2040. And contrary to a lot of things that are talked about between, Nepal has been trying to play India and China, against each other. Perhaps in the 1960s, when the war took place between India and China, yes, at that point of time, Nepal had a bit of an opportunity to play against each other, one against each other. But post that, it's been very clear that the Chinese have, maintained that, Nepal needs to work with India very clearly. This is, from, a lot of the pieces I've read and talked to people who were part of the royal delegations and then later on with the democratic governments. China has maintained that. But it was only in 2015, after the earthquake, China suddenly finds Nepal interesting, and then the Belt and Road Initiative begins, and that's where we see a huge engagement of China, not in the terms of investments that we see in Southeast Asia or in parts of Africa, but then there is a lot of intervention also on the soft side of it. So currently, like 5 years ago, if I would met a Chinese ambassador, you'd say, "Hello, Mr. Shakya," I'll say, "Hello, Your Excellency." And if I would say anything else, an interpreter would turn up. And then that's how you talk. The last ambassador, she was fluent in Nepali, she could speak. The current ambassador, the first public appearance was on March 8, 2019, where she performed a Nepali dance on a Nepali number. And that's the sort of, and every sort of a Chinese embassy official would speak Nepali, which is completely different than when you go to the Indian embassy, where you're greeted in Hindi, and that sense of very colonial, sort of master approach still remains. And that's why if we look at how Nepalis have taken, sort of China pretty well, sort of accepted China, whereas they still have challenges with India. And the analogy I use is from political commentator C.K. Lal. He says that, Nepal, for Nepal, India is like the big brother. You fight, you have this, you have to live with it, with him, but then you have to continuously fight. And China is like that sweet cousin sister who comes once in a while, gives you a gift, and you're never upset with that sweet cousin. So that's what Sikalal says. And I think I really look at how Nepalis don't have any objections to what, sort of what China does or the way China operates. People give benefit of doubt. And so it's not the investments alone, but these softer issues are what I look at. And also I talk about how India and China are working very closely to each other. I mean, if you look at between President Xi Jinping and sort of Prime Minister Modi, they have met about 16, 17 times in the past 5 years. There's a tremendous amount of in Chinese investments in India, and there is Indian businesses that are operating in China. And so we don't see that at any point of time that China-India is going to get a confrontational situation, and Nepal will have to take sides as to whether you want to be with India or China. So that's the sort of, it's again my perspective in terms of, how I see this unfolding. And in the final part, I talk about, what is the future like. And I take 2030 as a mark point because it's a government document I worked on. So I pick up from those things. I talk about what are the sectors that can work. And then I talk about, what is it that is required for economic transformation. In my first book, just coming out of my corporate world, I just thought that it was important to talk about investments and management, and that's what I emphasized on. But now in this book there's a whole chapter where I talk about unless there's going to be societal transformation, it's going to be difficult to get economic transformation moving, which means that you start looking at basic issues like cleanliness, as Gwen was talking about, infrastructure, managing your own personal infrastructure, then, societal infrastructure, small things. How do we focus on that? So that's where I sort of end this book in. So just before I, sort of open up for questions. So, the title has Vajra, and Vajra is, it's a symbolism that's used in both Hinduism and also in Buddhism. It's the thunderbolt. It has different interpretations of the Vajra, but I'll just read out the last paragraph of my introduction to share what does the Vajra mean for me. The phrase unleashing the Vajra, I believe, will be used as a metaphor in the future where it will denote the unleashing of Nepal's potential between its two neighbors by hitching its wagon to their fast-moving engines. The Vajra can have different meanings for people of different faiths and beliefs, but for me, it is a symbol that denotes potential. It is also an assurance of a dream that cannot be put down due to the indestructible powers represented by the diamond, the dream of millions of Nepalis across the world. Finally, it is the irresistible force of the thunderbolt that will bring about positive transformation. Thank you. I'll stop here.
Thank you, Sujeev. I think you've reconfirmed your reputation as CEO, Chief Economic Optimist. This is a very small gathering. In Bangkok, there used to be something called the Friends of Nepal Group that I was a member of, and the only reason I was a member was because I had one Nepalese friend. So occasionally I would go there and we'd eat Nepalese food and talk about Nepal, yeah? But, I assume that people are here because you're interested in Nepal, and please feel free to ask any questions you have, and maybe just let us know your name and affiliation, yeah? I'm happy to kick things off unless there's somebody jumping for the mic there. There is a mic in the back, and...
Should we bring it up since there's a...
Yeah, sure. We can just... Yeah,เอาไมค์มาเข้ามาเอาก้าวหน้านะเอามาอยู่นี่นะดีกว่านะ
You kick it off.
Okay. Sujeev, I've read both your books, and this one, obviously, your one of the new focuses is on China. And quite frankly, I was a little bit disappointed that there wasn't more on China, because you do a lot on India, but not as much on China. I suppose that's because there's not that much to write about at the moment between on what China is doing in Nepal. But, I have a few questions, like, for instance, why has there not been more Chinese foreign investment in Nepal? If you go to a place like Myanmar, even Thailand, the Chinese are investing here. And why are they not investing in Nepal? Is it because of the various reasons that you cite in your book, like there's no electricity, there's no infrastructure? I mean, are they turned off by those things too? And, my other question would be, why haven't you or somebody in Nepal looked more into the Tibetan business community? I suppose there is one. I don't know. They're not all monks, are they? I mean, there must be some indigenous or local investment or business structure there in Tibet that maybe Nepalese could, cultivate some more interesting business relationships with all your cartels and associations. I'm sure they should be able to approach that. Yeah, I mean, why hasn't anyone looked into that, or is there nothing to look into?
No, interesting question, Peter. I think first of all, we need to understand that for Nepal, China became a neighbor only in 1960. Till that time, for Nepal, Tibet was its neighbor, and its trade was with Tibet. So if you look at the traditional routes, look at from the 11th, 12th century, all the trading routes were with Tibet, and that's what it did business with. And my dad was in Tibet for about 14 years, as that's where he was a Tibet trader. So, and then the focus shifted from Nepal when young husband, started this campaign out of Kalimpong in West Bengal in India, and then the trade route moved from Nepal to India. So we need to look at that. And then 1960, after the Chinese taking over of Tibet, you had again the war between India and China. So that really brought in. So Nepal really didn't have much opportunity to engage. And also, if you look at Tibet per se, with its population, apart from tourism that's growing, there's not much of economic opportunity that's there. But having said that, if you look at the borders between Nepal and China, the Tibetan Autonomous Region, as they call it, there is a lot of movement and trade. So if you look at the Sherpa community, is basically a Tibetan community that came in the 15th, 16th century and settled in Nepal. And you have, if you go to Western Nepal, like in place like Dolpo, you still have people moving, across the two borders freely. If you go to Eastern Nepal, you see again same thing, the way people are moving. But these are more of border trades that you see. And also, if you look at in Nepal, the type of investors we see from China coming in are more of mom and pop, store operators. There are, people who are starting restaurants, small 30-room hotels, for the Chinese, doing some, trade. We don't see the large investors, as I was mentioning earlier, that I see in, we've met in, Cambodia or Myanmar or parts of Africa. We don't see that. And and why is it? I think one is that, as I was mentioning earlier, till 2015, if you talk to any of the diplomats who have been posted in China, Nepal really did not, exist in their scheme of things. And so the discovery only began post 2015, and we see pretty much heightened activities. But it is not, you don't see the large state investors of China coming into Nepal. But we just had a deal of a hydropower company that has just been with Chinese investment, and there are a few we are seeing coming up. And we'll see how it goes. But again, whatever said and done, China also treads on this very, very carefully, because they know it is India's backyard. And so that is also very clear in terms of how China is very cautious as to moving within Nepal. And whatever is said and done in terms of the theatrics around what comes out in the media, internally there's a lot of sort of a tacit agreement in terms of not blowing up things between India and China. So perhaps that's what we see. And of course, on the investment, the problems any foreign investor in Nepal faces is a problem that Chinese investors face. And I do interact with them, and they are very frustrated with government approvals, the cartels stopping, businesses. And so it's very common. So China is also another foreign investor in Nepal.
Can I ask a question? Or did someone want to ask a question? Oh, I have a question. Is this mic on? Is it working? It's not.
I can hear you, but I'm right
this is better. Yeah, this is good. Yeah. So, I'm Gwen Robinson, club president, and I was recently in Nepal, as Sujeev knows. And one thing I didn't ask you at the time, but maybe that's because it was after my trip out of Kathmandu, and I drove down south and then back again. But everywhere you go, you're quite right about this thing about Australia. And every second building seems to have a sign saying, study in Australia. Even in the middle of the countryside in some village, there's at least 10 signs saying study in Australia. The other sign I saw was study in Japan. So it was mainly Australia and Japan. Very little, I just saw a few for Britain and nowhere else. And the other thing is, it's very clear that the country is, I think it is still a least developed economy, right?
Yeah.
And it is very poor in most parts. So this would suggest that every second Nepali can afford to go off to Australia to study. It doesn't add up. How and why is this? And does the Australian government subsidise Nepalis to go to Australia? Secondly, in Australia, where my mother lives, in a nursing home, every carer in the nursing home is Nepali, and it's actually quite common right through Sydney that Nepalis work in old people's homes in Australia. What's that about?
They're the students, yeah.
Yeah. So I think
students, yeah, exactly.
So this is the I think whenever we talk about, and this is what I talk about with my economist friends, and when you talk about economy, people talk about income. People talk about what is your income and GDP per capita and all. But Nepal is an asset-driven country. It's not an income-driven country. 86% of Nepalis own assets. So they own land, and the appreciation of assets. A work we did with JLL shows that in 10 years, the asset appreciation is about 9 times. So the mindset is that, okay, you have 2 kids, they want to go to Australia, sell a plot of land, then send them off. And they send back money, then buy another plot of land. So it's a very land-driven. So if you see people, and this is what a lot of my diplomat friends in Nepal I used to say, they'll say, my driver, Sujeev, he's so poor. He was coming during our festival, he wanted some extra money, should I give him? And I used to tell them that, look, by the time you leave, in another 4 years, you realize that he's about 10 times richer than you. So then suddenly, then you suddenly realize, this guy has land here, that adds up to $2 million, that adds to $2 million. So it's not an income-driven country, so it's an asset-driven country. So whenever people have to have, expenses to be made, so that shows how there are about, with so many people that go to study outside. That's one. The other is that, as I was talking about earlier, migration has been, it's a very romanticized stuff there. It's not only if you, like when I travel so much, so I meet up these guys and I say that, why are you going to go to Qatar and how much you're going to earn? He says, $150, $200 I'm going to send back. And I said, in Nepal, you can earn about $300. Now, if you look at Indian workers in Nepal, send back about $3 billion from Nepal. It's per capita is one of the highest in terms of Indian workers sending back money to, from Nepal. And so if you look at that, so there is this romanticizing of going outside, which has been there for hundreds of years. So people going out and, wanting. And then you have where do they go and work and why there is work. And so people find if you transit in Doha airport, 80% of the staff that work in Doha airport, the Hamad International, would be Nepalis, And their service industry has been always the big one. So it began with the British Gurkha legacy, the trust, Nepalis being trusted people, polite people, that's a big thing. And then from a service, I always say, our biggest asset is brand smile. You'll see, and that's why in caregiving industry, not only in Australia, you go to Canada, you go to Israel, it's all Nepali, sort of men and women who are in the caregiving industry. So if you look at restaurants, so even in Bangkok, you go to the Indian restaurants, you'll generally find Nepali staff. It's wherever there's hospitality, sort of service that's involved, that's where we see. And that's what they really enjoy doing. And it's also the mindset. So I was chatting with a guy who had just come back from Macau. And he was transiting here at the Bangkok airport. I think it's about a year and a half ago. And he was talking to his friend, and he says that, look, I don't have to do anything out there. I just stand in front of this casino building, and I get a paycheck. Where can I find a better job than that? So your perception of because hard work is completely antithesis of what, our rent-seeking mindset, entrepreneurial mindset. So if you're doing nothing and you're earning money, why not? I have to just work little to make money, whereas I have to toil in Nepal. Electricity is not there. The roads are bad. Sort of water is an issue. So these are multiple dimensions I do see, and that's what I talk about in the book in terms of why these behaviors exist.
Yeah, but why the Australia fixation? Is there a subsidy?
It depends. No, it depends. So if you look at now, UK is opening up post-Brexit. You'll see. At one point of time, UK was also 45,000 was our peak. Now UK is going to give visas that would allow you to work for 2 years. We'll see it soaring in. So currently Poland. So last year I was looking at the numbers. There are 3,000 people gone to Poland.
Right, but all the signs are for Australia.
Yeah, Australia is the big one, the dominant one, and it's very lucrative. Now Japan is opening up for its caregiving. So Japan is going to open up. So the language institutes are opening up. Korea is big, so Korea is also So people wanting to go, and these are not poor people who are going. It's generally people who can afford to pay these agents a lot of money, and then they are going, and then they find economic sense in that. It's beyond economics the way I see it.
You mentioned in the book that GDP growth has been good for the last 2 years. Is this just go back to remittances, or what else is happening that?
No, I think remittances don't form part of the GDP, nor does asset sale. But if you're looking at percentage-wise, it's grown because our base is small. So if you look at, say, 2006, we are a $10 billion economy. So, if you are saying you just go by 1 billion, it becomes, 10%. So our base is still low, so which means that we have been able to achieve. And let's not forget that for 10 years, we had insurgency. It was, there was a civil war in the country for about 10 years, and that did slow things down. But then it's bounced back. And the last 2 years, the growth numbers are also post-earthquake. There's been a lot of spending, and that's what some of the work we've done is coming out very clearly that post-earthquake spending has increased, also has helped to increase the GDP.
To touch on a different topic, we're sitting here in Thailand, which is a constitutional monarchy and has had its interesting last 10 years with this question. Nepal for 250 years was under the Shah monarchy, and then 2008 it was discontinued. When I was there in 2016, people were saying, oh, we used to have just one king, now we have many kings, that everybody who's got a little money sort of acts like a king. What's been the evolution? I think people in Thailand might be interested in that, but don't talk about Thailand yet. But what has the evolution has been since 2008 until now? I think still some politicians talk about let's bring back the monarchy, and has the Nepalese population evolved beyond this sort of need for paternalistic monarchy figure?
I think, as you're mentioning, I think I also talk about one king is gone and many kings have, emerged. And I feel there are 2 points I look at, having worked, the former king was the chairman of the investment committee, a company that I worked for. So I think 2001, after the Royal Massacre, the last king, Gyanendra, who became the king, he was not, he was never trained to become a king. And I think, he made quite a few mistakes, and also he was very lonely in terms of all his other family members were killed in the massacre. So he did not know how to handle it, and while you can blame it on the advisors, but at the end of the day he was calling the shots. And then the way he went back to autocratic rule, I think that was a final nail in the coffin. So on one hand, you people all ganged up against him. So we need to understand that. B, I think, as I was mentioning earlier, Nepal is, again, a feudal society, very, very male-dominated, patriarchal society. And I think whatever structures exist, and this is not only in Nepal, I think it's throughout South Asia, it then, starts mimicking the older regimes. Now, even if you look at our president, who is a woman, the way she operates is she sort of promotes a sort of a woman-led patriarchy. And so it's very similar, the way she would like to want to stand in a certain function, or the way she wants to conduct herself. So it's I think it's cultural, and I think I look at the way as a Hindu/Buddhist societies are structured, and the way we place our gods. We are always in search of gods. And then we replace one god with another god. And I think that's what perhaps explains the one set of kings going away and multiple kings and queens emerging.
Has it done anything, the disappearance of the monarchy, to encourage a more egalitarian society? Because I was struck how there was still such a caste system operating in Nepal. Maybe it's diminished a lot over the years, but I mean, these two combinations you have of number one, going beyond the monarchy or leaving the monarchy behind. Number two, you are under a communist regime for a while, and the communists were part of the government. Surely they had some sort of cultural impact in terms of these kind of hierarchies that still seem to exist in Nepal, the caste and the Newa, this people, and the Brahmins are doing this. I was struck how similar to India that was. Yeah.
No, in terms of culturally, it's a larger civilization we talk about. So we have to distinguish the discourse around ethnic groups, and then we have to distinguish between ethnic groups and the caste system. Okay. Caste system exists in certain groups, and it does not exist in others. But then, when you mix the two, it creates a concoction. Like for instance, with my own community, we are a separate ethnic group, but we are merged into a different caste to say that these guys are people who use alcohol to appease the gods, so they should be also in a lower hierarchy than us. So these complications have come in, but I would say a lot of the young people you would meet, like in my office nowadays, 10 years ago, if you would put food together and you'll say, let's, each one of us eat from that plate. 20 years ago in my old organization, it would have been very difficult. People will try to figure out which caste who belongs to. But today, I don't think they care who is cooking, who is bringing on the plate. So I think there's been transformation, but also I think if you look at the 10 years of insurgency, did question a lot of these issues. To say that Nepal is beyond Kathmandu, Nepal is beyond the certain few communities that, drove the discourse around, around Nepal. So we need to also look at from the perspective that what the change is taking place in terms of our perspectives about caste and about ethnic groups. And that's changing, I would say. And as people are, there are, of course, the people who want to, are right-wingers everywhere are there. They want to bring back a lot of these issues. But as just a quick commentary on the communists in Nepal, I think that's my favorite. Everybody who, especially people who come in, the parachute folks who come in and say, oh, Nepal, communist has been influenced by China. No. Nepal's communism came from India. So it came from Kolkata, that's where I spent quite some time. So it's a very much a rent-seeking form of communism, which is not entrepreneurial, which does not believe in hard working, it does not believe in productivity. So we need to also distinguish in terms of the communism we see as in Nepal, which is distinct than communism that is, talked about in China. Or in Vietnam or any of these countries.
Right. You spell that out in your book as kind of an anti-Westernism, anti-capitalism, not really pro-egalitarianism and stuff like that.
Yeah.
There are still, I don't know if there are copies. Oh, okay, please, in the back there. Yep.
Yeah, Sam Wright, club member. I'm curious as to how far advanced the rail and roads are coming from China into Nepal. Are they making those formidable journeys now modern, and will it open up Nepal?
As far as the way I personally see it, as a very personal opinion, it seems the way I see it is China, whatever China does, is an investor, is a business person. Okay, there has to be economic sense, to make the decisions. So if you look at what they have done in Pakistan with the CPEC, what they're doing in Myanmar, it does give them access to the ports. For Nepal, until unless it's going to help them to further their interest of business with India, these projects are going to be there on paper. I'm not sure how much it's actually going to happen, because if you look at the feasibility studies, I've been talking to some of those folks who are working on these projects. They are expensive. Of course, they did it in Tibet. They put in tunnels to bring in, train right up to Lhasa. But then, that Lhasa train coming to Kerong, that's been deferred by another 10 years. Is that going to, from Kerong, is it going to come to Kathmandu? I don't know. There's a lot of roads would come in, but then there has to be real economic sense that China sees it to, cut across merchandise or other stuff. And also a lot of people who have been studying the Belt and Road, and Bruno Macias, who wrote the introduction, the blurb to the book, he talks about China's BRI is more to connecting with Europe rather than connecting with Southeast. One is to get access to the seas and to get access to European markets, which we have been seeing through their trains. And how much do they really benefit by having a train line, spending billions of dollars with Nepal? We don't see the economic sense. So until unless there's a major military or a political compulsion, we don't see that happening. Even within the Tibet, if you look at most of their plans have been deferred by nearly 10 years, because the Kerong train should have been coming by 2020, it should have been there. It's been moved. So that's how I see it. I may be wrong, but that's my perspective.
Is there still a large Tibetan population, and how do they see the rapprochement with China?
In terms of the Tibetan population, that there are two sets of Tibetan population. One is those who were there before 1960, before the the war and China taking over Tibet, and then you have ones who came in as refugees. So most of them, they have been very progressive, they have been very entrepreneurial, and the world has opened up for them. They have been very global thinkers, but at the same time, preserving their culture and preserving, their source of identity. And so you see Tibetans in US, you see them in Switzerland, you see in many parts of the world. The generation that really saw them moving out of Tibet and the refugee generation, that's pretty much gone. For the new generation, they really don't have the baggage of being seen, being chucked out of Tibet. And so they have just moved on. And of course, Nepal follows the One China policy, which means that Nepal government as such does not allow, like many other South Asian and Southeast Asian governments, do not allow anything relating to Tibet being discussed in Nepal. No celebration of Dalai Lama's birthday, official celebration, not allow Dalai Lama to come to sort of Nepal. So these are stands that the government is taking and continues to take. Even in India, we've seen that happening, and so that's the sort of thing I see. But people have moved on. I don't think there's a small population that has been impacted, but a majority of them have moved on.
Chris.
Oh, Chris, go ahead.
Hi, Chris Coles. I'm a member here. You covered the train pretty much. You think it's not going to happen because instead of the train coming through Laos is costing China $7-8 billion, but it's part of a plan to get all the way through to Lamchapang container port in Thailand and Singapore.
Yeah.
But when they go into Nepal, it's like they're not going to go all the way into India.
Yeah. So
there's no real reason.
Yeah. There's also the discussion between India and China to build together. So because does that make sense for India also? So if it does make sense for India between trade and we will see that happening.
If India wants the train to go through to Mumbai, then they'll finally build the train. Yeah. But it'll be with India's permission and blessing.
Yeah.
That's very interesting.
Yeah.
I have two other areas of interest in Nepal, which I've sort of been following for years. One is every time someone calls Bhutan the Happy Kingdom, I immediately say, yeah, but didn't they do that ethnic cleansing and got away with it? No one even talks about it. So what's happened? What is the feeling in Nepal about the ethnic cleansing in Bhutan against Nepalese? They stole all their property, they took away their citizenship, they stole their birth records. They basically decimated the community, which is 15% of Bhutan, I believe, and they made them stateless. Do people in Nepal care about the Nepalese who came out of Bhutan? Where are all those people living now? Are they still in camps, or are they gone all over the world? And what is the whole? Does it annoy you when Bhutan portrays itself as the happy kingdom? Does it annoy people? If I was Nepalese, I'd be really annoyed.
No, I think definitely Nepalese, the relationship between Nepal and Bhutan soared after that event, and it has not come back again. While Bhutanese do travel to Nepal a lot, we have about 50,000 Bhutanese out of 800,000 come to Nepal because most of the pilgrimage sites are in Nepal. But we are not have the equal reciprocal, arrangements for Nepalese to visit Bhutan. And so there is a diplomatic impasse that's now going to be 30 years in a year. Nepalese have been upset about what Bhutan has done, but also Nepal did not either through informal channels or formal channels really take on this issue. So when there were ministerial discussions that were taking place, I think Nepal was very ill prepared for those discussions, and it was about trying to see how we can deal with this problem and not to see that this is going to be a very long haul problem. So they were in camps in eastern Nepal, nearly 100,000 of them. Now they have been repatriated. About 60,000 of them are in the US, quite a few of them in Europe. There are about 10,000 people left. There are efforts being made especially for elderly Bhutanese who did not want to migrate to any other country, for them to go back. There are back channels that have been continuously working. But as I said, Nepal's always their foreign relations and the way it has handled diplomacy has been very poor. So we have not been able to handle that much. But if you look at the larger Nepali perspective, also it has a lot of ethnic issues around it because there is a certain larger ethnic group that was responsible for, this exodus. So if you go and talk to certain, larger, ethnic groups within Bhutan who belong to the larger Nepali sort of definition, they would say that, because of these people, it was a good thing that they happened. So you hear that. So there are different versions of it. At one point of time, I did write quite a bit against it. But then over the period of time, it's not that I've changed my views, but then to find a solution, it's been 30 years. Now we have to find a solution to this. I've been more solution oriented, and I've been trying my best to see how we can resolve this issue. For Bhutan, if you look at from a very selfish perspective, if Bhutan had not done this, perhaps if you look at the trajectory of Nepal in the past 30 years, what happened in terms of, its tumultuous, trajectory, The same thing could have happened in Bhutan. So if you go back to Bhutan, they'll say, oh, we did the right thing. If you had not done that, we would have also become Nepal. So these are different perspectives that come in, but I'm of the strong opinion that this has to be brought into closure, because there are two Himalayan economies and countries especially facing the same challenges through climate change. So if you look at, the challenges we are facing through, glacier melting, challenges we have on a lot of fronts in terms of, global warming. These are challenges that we jointly need to take. And there are regional trade and regional perspectives to look at also.
The other issue, smaller issue, in talking to people from Nepal and Mumbai, they tell me that there were a lot of mafias. There was quite a large business of trafficking going on, controlled by very brutal mafias in Nepal and India, of young people from Nepal down into India to work as labor. Is that still going on, or was that always an exaggerated problem and never existed? Or
no, I think I would say in the past 20 years, now Nepalis have opportunity to go to Malaysia, go to Qatar, go to Saudi Arabia and work. So then Nepal was, for India was the obvious reason to move, for Nepalis to move. Also, we need to understand that till 1996, a big chunk of Nepal, of far western Nepal, was not connected to the main hinterland Nepal. So if you had to travel to far west Nepal from Kathmandu or other parts of Nepal, you had to go through India. So people in far west Nepal, it was obvious for them to go to Mumbai and go to Gujarat and other places. But if you look at from the pecking order, people would like to go to other countries, and if they don't find any opportunity anywhere, then they go into India. And India can be also seasonal. So you go to become a farm worker, seasonal work you do, and you come back, and it's in terms of cultural assimilation, in terms of language, in terms of culture, religion, there's a lot of similarity. But the trafficking at the level at which it used to be done, say, and 20, 30 years ago, that has, that I would say come down. But let's not forget that human trafficking takes place in different, like now the big, there was a racket that was busted where Nepalis were being brought overland to Myanmar through India, and then they were trafficked into Gulf. So these things continue. But definitely with India, there is more monitoring at the border, but then all these traffickers always have, they are one step ahead of the rest. Yeah.
Hi, Sujeev. I wanted to pick up on your... Oh, sorry, yes.
Yeah.
Michelle Young, I'm working for Save the Children as an architect. And I was present in Nepal for on and off 3 years post the 2 earthquakes in 2015. I wanted to pick up on your comment at the end of your talk where you were saying that before the economic opportunities can really start in Nepal, you need to have some kind of social change happening at the ground level, small going up to the top. And what my observation was as working within one of the large NGOs operational in that response was...
Can you Democrats keep it down a little bit? What's this? Is that a fire alarm or something going on? It's disrupting our program up here. Fire alarm. Okay. Who's smoking? Yeah?
We need to go.
Sorry.
Yeah. So, it was really a question around... There's social change happening. During the earthquake response, the government were very stringent in requiring all international NGOs to operate through local level organizations. And that had to happen right from day one, which was a great challenge. But do you see that as having had any effect at ground level in terms of what you're suggesting now for that social change to happen, for the economics to follow?
I think, if you look at the post-earthquake, we can look at it from two distinct lenses. One is that Nepalis don't really rely on the government. They are very resilient. And if you come to Nepal now, in 5 years, you don't feel that it's a country that cities that were devastated by the earthquake that way. Like if you compare to going to a place like Haiti, where you still see reminiscences of the earthquake. So from that perspective, Nepalis, very resilient. They move on. But then for the government, a lot of people in the government, it was a lot. I mean, there were a lot of scams that were also happening. But then it was suddenly there's this lot of money that was pouring in. and they didn't know how to really handle this. And I think it's like internet. If things don't work, you say shut down the internet rather than policing the internet. And that's what perhaps the government went in to do, to say that, oh, you can't work with organizations. And I've written op-eds where I've met people who raise money, and they tell me that, Sujeev, we've been raising money, our cost of operations is 35% of what we are raising. And I said, we don't want you. And so that way government is right, trying to, sort of stop, certain institutions becoming rich. But then it was not about, they did not get into selective, screening of organizations, and that perhaps created a problem. And again, which I talk about in the book, is money has never been the problem for Nepal. If we'll look at earthquake, $4.2 billion were committed. But did we manage to get anything? Because of the way we look at things. So even if you look at assets, you'll meet Nepalis who are pretty rich, but then when you look at their conduct, where they look at how they operate, that's a challenge. So that's where I try to link up on the societal transformation perspective, to say that how does that change take place? Yeah. Hopefully that answers your question.
Just to kind of wrap up here, unless there are other questions, somebody else, Sam?
Yeah.
Go ahead, yeah.
Hi, my name is Ed. I'm just a random member of the club here. Do you see the Tibet issue becoming a problem or resurfacing when the Dalai Lama finally goes on to his next incarnation? Do you think there's going to be cause for any friction? Because, like you said, Nepal has only been bordering China since 1960.
See, if you look at the Tibet issue, one of the biggest propagants of the Tibet issue and campaigners of the Tibet issue was United States. Let's not forget that. United States did help to keep the issue alive. And if you look at under the current administration, we haven't seen, Tibet is a pretty much a non-issue, because I think, with the U.S.-China trade relations, whatever is happening on the ground, it's huge. And you don't want to, create a problem with China just by getting the Dalai Lama in for a talk. And if you look at the last visit of His Holiness in U.S., who did he meet? And earlier he used to meet the president, and that's all gone. So without U.S. backing, and if you look at in Europe, nobody wants to take on China. If you look at Norway, by just giving the Nobel Peace Award to the Dalai Lama, they got into a real serious trouble. And if you see, nobody really wants to confront China that way. So from that perspective, we don't see that issue continuing. And within the Tibetan, for me, this is a very topic dear to me, because my dad lived in Tibet, and so I understand the language. I speak a bit. I have a lot of friends. And I see within the Tibetan community also, there's that sort of that. So if Tibet was given back again, here is it. It's a separate country. How many of them are going to actually go back? So that's the key, I think, parameter I look at. And everybody is put it behind. You are an Indian citizen, or you're a Swiss national, or you're an American citizen, and that's how it's moved. But then if China and US gets into further confrontation, then definitely the Tibet card would be used, because it's not only a card about Tibetans, it's about water. It's because Tibet, is the biggest, source of water for China, and let's not forget that. And that's what is a very important source of, for entire China. And then again, it has its river flows coming down. So I don't know. That's how I personally see it, in terms of as the water discourse, sort of gets complicated, then the Tibet issue may come back again. I don't know. It makes sense.
Sure. Thank you.
Okay. Yeah. I see some of you have bought Sujeev's book. For those of you who don't know, I think there are a few copies available in the back, and it's a real steal, because it's like 500 baht a copy, and the reason it's such a steal is because he had them printed in India. And I'm interested personally, Sujeev. Well, who are you? When you write these books, who are you aiming at? I mean, some of your recommendations at the end are just, they crack me up, because they go right to the heart of things. When you go to Nepal, the time difference, or the official time is like 6 hours and 45 minutes plus GMT, right? And it's the only country on earth where it's like a 15-minute time differential. Yeah, 10 minutes, whatever. And then what, Sunday is a working day and Friday half the day is off. I mean, there's a lot of sort of unique stuff about Nepal, and that's cute, and that's nice if you're a tourist. It's kind of funny and interesting and quirky. But if I was a businessman, I'd be going nuts, yeah. And so when you write these books, are you hoping to influence the government itself, or are you just pointing out the quirkiness of your?
No, I think from my experience from the last book. So if I would draw up all the recommendations that I put in, and and then what are some of the things that have happened in the 10 years, it's quite a bit. So I feel that the things that I've flagged, some of them would definitely get implemented. And it's not the big issues we are talking about. So as Peter mentioned, one of the biggest challenges, and I also represent Bauer Group Asia for India and Bhutan, and my my Thai colleague Jay is here. And just to set up our conference calls, we always it goes crazy because we are the only clock that has this 15 minutes difference. And I don't know why. And we are the only, if you look at our flags of the world, we are the only ones that doesn't have a rectangular flag. It's very interesting as to how we have kept this, be it working days. And and this is seen as nationalism. And that's what is a challenge for me, to say that we are different. So, you say, okay, Everest is in Nepal, Buddha was born in Nepal. So you take this nationalistic ownership feeling around these, and that's what has created complications. But again, the hope is that as more Nepalis who are studying outside are coming back, we can't even accommodate more than 5% of the people who are going out. But when they're coming back, a lot is changing. So if you look at how even meetings are conducted nowadays are changing, if you've got younger people coming in, they change, the way things operate. And that's the hope that, change will take place that way.
Okay, thank you very much, Sujeev.
Thanks.
Can I also thank Rita for excellent moderation?
Thanks, Peter.
Moderation is my middle name.